Hey everybody, this is another Q&A session with me, Dustin Horvath. And if you like these videos, you should check out my podcast, ADHD in a Hurry. It's both me as a solo caster, but also me interviewing people with ADHD and people who don't have ADHD, who work as professional, ADHD coaches and whatnot, and everything kind of in between. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on things. Or if you have questions for me as well, feel free to message me or leave a comment as well. But without further ado, let's get to more of your burning questions. So the question here is, why do you start so many things but struggle to finish them? First of all, ouch, right? That's kind of somewhat at the heart, I'm sure, of the experience of basically anyone with ADHD, regardless of your traits or whatever subtype you might have, etc. Even regardless really of what your age is, it kind of comes down to like the ability to kind of start things, or at least to see, kind of conceive an idea for something. And then when it comes to rubber meeting the road, it's kind of like, oh, like this was, the idea sounded great in my head, but now all of a sudden, I have to deal with the reality of this. Like I have to actually commit to and follow through on something. Now, I don't know about any of you watching this, especially those with ADHD, but there are conversations with folks who talk about having trouble starting something, and I totally get that part. I am more of I'll get 85, 90, maybe even 95% done with something, and that's when my brain shuts off on me. That's when the dopamine spigot is turned off almost entirely at that point. Like, I'll give you a small example. I was washing dishes, and I washed most of the dishes. There was probably like 3 things left. You'd think to yourself, well, you've come this far, why not just finish them? But my brain kind of signaled to me like, hey, we're kind of done here. Like, yes, it's a minuscule amount of stuff left to do, but for whatever reason, this felt like the most challenging, like difficult, energy-sucking thing that I'd have left to do, basically. So if you know the expression, jack of all trades, master of none, to me, that's kind of a polite way of describing the experiences and the interests of a lot of people with ADHD. And listen, if you are frustrated as like the outside observer of this phenomenon of like the ADHDer that starts a bunch of things and doesn't finish them, imagine sometimes how we feel. Not even like if you as the non-ADHDer like call into question these behaviors. Imagine how we feel like when we come across the beginnings of our handiwork and then begin to remember, like, oh yeah, I intended to finish that painting. Oh yeah, I started a podcast months ago and I just kind of abandoned it. All the money and the time, the research, everything that sometimes goes into what's going to be these grand ideas and plans sometimes just goes crashing and burning. And it's not like we're oblivious to it. We're often the most frustrated and embarrassed about these circumstances. Here's another question. Why are you so disorganized all the time? Again, ouch, right? It's not. So what's interesting about this is it's kind of like this preconceived notion that ADHDers can't focus. We absolutely can. Sometimes it comes down to our brain overriding what we're going to focus on, and it's not always what you might conventionally think. Like the example I gave in the previous video was, you're in a class and you'd think that you'd prioritize your focus and concentration on what like the teacher's saying. But there's that low hum of the air conditioner. So naturally, for some reason, your brain is like, that seems more interesting or more distracting. So we're going to put more of the resources towards focusing on that thing. I had a conversation with this woman named George. She's a professional organizer in the UK, and she has a son, I believe, who's a teenager at this point with ADHD. And she learned a lot about ADHD through the experiences of her son, both before he was diagnosed, during that diagnosis era, and now the time afterwards, and kind of going like, oh, right, like there are kind of these unconventional ways in which he and other ADHDers, like some of the clients that she's worked with too, how we organize our systems, how we organize ourselves, and the systems that we do in fact have. It's kind of this structure and flow that we maintain. It's just not conventional to what you as an outsider might expect, right? Like you might have like 98 out of 100 people approach organizational systems probably about the same way. And you might have like 2, maybe 3 other people proportionate to that, they may have a different system from all the rest or even from each other. They might have truly individualistic ways of organizing themselves. But if you take a few minutes to really study and look through like how they're doing it, you might actually say to yourself like, oh, I see what you're going for. And maybe with a little extra time and information, you might go, oh, now I understand kind of the reasons why you do things the way that you do. Like, I'll give you 2 examples. For one, and my dad used to do this. So I don't know how much of this was influential on his part and how much of there's like a genetic component to all this. But I remember my dad owned an auto body shop and he always had all of his customer, the paperwork, the estimates. He was always talking about estimates. That's, as a kid, that's what I thought besides towing cars. That's what I thought his job only entailed, was just writing estimates because he was constantly talking about them. But my dad always had papers everywhere. And he had those special papers where it was like the white copy, the pink, and the yellow, like the triplicate almost, like everyone gets a copy of something. I remember he would always have like copies of yellow paper seemingly everywhere. Those are his copies, right? But I can still remember his desk being littered with papers and then binders, like regulations and this year's make and model of all the different major manufacturers and everything, right? Because this is pre-internet, so like everything had to be printed and accessible in these giant binders. So he had stacks of stuff on the floor, on the desk, underneath the desk. It was chaos. But I also saw in the instances, like let's say if my mother came in at the time and would like try to like help him by organizing his space to make it cleaner, he would invariably every time come in freaking out like, where are my things? Why did you move my stuff? I knew where everything was. I had everything in the pile and everything's where it's supposed to have been. So what I was kind of privy to without really getting a full explanation of it at the time was my dad had to have things visually in front of him. And that helped him to keep track. Like if he put something like in a file cabinet, but it's something he needed to have access to at the ready, he would probably be more prone to forgetting about it entirely or being stuck kind of looking for it at times because it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. But if he kept that important binder of, parts for Toyota cars from like 1993 or something, if that was on his desk, that probably made it much easier for his eyes and his brain to keep track of that document or series of documents comparatively. But I'm kind of the same way. I would always keep papers on surfaces so they were easily accessible, even if it was frustrating for other people, even if it was overwhelming or kind of came off as being unprofessional. I guess I always kind of recognized how other people do things, especially when they do it differently, right? The other example I was going to give you, and I used this in my conversation with George, when I organized our garage, for example, I had all of these tools that I inherited from my father-in-law. Now, you'd think most people probably have like a tool bin, some kind of enclosed space to put your stuff. I recognized pretty quickly, almost kind of intuitively, that I wanted to use these clear plastic shelves. I had like 6 or 8 of them stacked that made up the basis of my toolbox. Now, my wife hated it. She still hates it, but she tolerates it because I kind of explained to her why I insisted on keeping these. But that was part of my conversation with George, and what she was relaying to me was like, people with ADHD have their own organizational systems. They're just unconventional. And most people sometimes just kind of fail to take the extra 2 seconds to appreciate what it is that they might actually be watching or observing, as it were, even if it's not how they want to do it. I think a lot of people with ADHD kind of learn structures of empathy and observational abilities because you kind of have to, like, to survive, right, socially and otherwise. But I think we also are often more aware of and accommodating for other people and how they may do things because we're always kind of looking for that same kind of courtesy with how we do things. But by contrast, a lot of people who are kind of stuck in sort of these conventional ways of doing things, these conventional systems, I think oftentimes these folks kind of struggle to think outside the bounds of what they know to do because understandably, when a lot of people kind of replicate and do a lot of the same things you do, it's kind of like that road often more traveled. We know this works. This is what we do, right? This is what people do to stay organized and on top of things. You, by extension, like the ADHDer, with your paperwork all over your desk, that's messy, that's unsightly, right? That's not organized, that lacks specification in what you're doing. But I think if these neurotypical folks would take an extra few beats to really look at something, to assess it, or even, God forbid, ask that person, like, hey, how does your system kind of work in your favor? Like, it stresses me out, or it may not be how I would do things. But what is it about this that really seems to work for you? Something to consider. Now, here's a question about ADHD medications. So this question is, why don't you take ADHD meds and quote unquote fix your situation? Or I guess fix ADHD. Now, listen, I can't, and I've said this on podcasts and interviews and videos in the past, I can't tell you, let's say, what the right choice is when it comes to systems of treatment for ADHD. And in case you weren't sure, medication is part of it, and really you can take ADHD meds and you can divide it into the stimulant and non-stimulant areas, right? The important thing to note here is that the stimulant meds, like a Ritalin or an Adderall, something like that, are often quicker acting, but they're temporary. Like, they only last for so many hours of a day, and in order for them to work, you have to take them, whenever you want to take them. Like, some people take them every day. Some people only take them on the days where they have work or school, whatever. Because, like on the weekends where you don't need to be as focused on something, you probably won't take it as often. Some people take non-stimulant medications, and these are ones that you have to take religiously every single day for it to kind of build up in your system. It can take 4 to 6 or even longer weeks for it to build up in your system to begin to take effect. But there are other courses of treatment like therapy. And some people will combine the two, like taking a medication, and it might actually be part of the program in order to get, let's say, stimulant medications. They also have to meet with a psychiatrist, X number of times a month or whatever, to assess how the combination of treatments are working or not working, dosages, etc. And I honestly think that's a pretty responsible way of doing things, but I am ignorant on some level from experience because I've never taken ADHD meds in my life. But with that said, I have done, and I am currently in a system of therapy, talk therapy. And if you're familiar with my stuff, you probably already know. I have a therapist with a background, a knowledge base about ADHD, and uses REBT and CBT primarily in his approach with me and other clients. That's part of the reason why I sought him out, was the ADHD component specifically. The REBT, CBT was like this happy additional component. But what I appreciate about my relationship and the work that I do with him is that it's not like this the stereotype that you might have of you laying on the couch and, oh, doctor, why do I have these dreams and thought, it's not that psychoanalytic or psychodynamic approach, like that Freudian thing of you're telling the knowledgeable one all of your stuff and they're going to reconfigure it and give it back to you as to what it actually means. It's not that. It's a lot of me going into topics that I think are relevant and important to me, either what I'm currently going through or maybe some repeated patterns of thoughts and beliefs and feelings and whatnot. And the good thing about the homework that I get when I do, or at least the thought experiments and discussions that I have in each session, is that it affords me opportunities to really unpack and play with these ideas and thoughts and feelings and everything, to kind of see what's at the root of everything and how do these things interconnect with each other. And also, how does this ultimately inform what I think, believe, how I feel during it, and ultimately how do I behave? So I can't, like I said, I can't tell you what the right choice is. I can tell you what's been working for me so far. And I would always encourage you, if and whenever possible, to reach out and get professional support in one way or another. It's kind of like there's no shame in getting therapeutic support, even for short term, if possible. It's kind of like you join a gym or something, and you just, even no matter how good a shape you might be in, or if you feel like you want to be in better shape, there's always a trained professional that can support and guide you, even if it's the first couple weeks, to give you the tools you might need and the motivation and the support so that you can work through more of those systems as you get more advanced on your own. Now, I'm going to do one more question because I find this question fascinating. The question is, didn't you grow out of ADHD by now? No. From some people, I've seen, either through conversation or, posts online or whatever, some people have commented that their ADHD has become more manageable as they've gotten older. Like their symptoms, maybe their hyperactive symptoms or traits kind of dissipate a little bit over time. I think for others, they might just find those support structures and ways of combating or working with, I should say, their specific blend of ADHD, like taking a stimulant medication in conjunction with therapies and things like that. But also, I think on some level, you gain enough experience or you learn from enough consequence or the combination. You bolster up enough authenticity and self-confidence, and you make up a support network that is more authentic and true to you. And all of this kind of helps to stack the deck in your favor. I don't think as a person with ADHD, you're truly guaranteed anything in that regard. But at the same time, there are those, I guess, that as they get older, the symptoms or their own blend of ADHD perhaps seems to get worse. But again, I think part of it is the internal in connection with the external. So like my internal world with the world around me. What ways in which I am or am not working on myself and also working with myself. Like I think part of this too is like when I try to diminish the impact of ADHD or if I try to struggle against what intuitively makes sense to me, right? Instead of working with myself or working with my strengths, as it were, and trying to accommodate for areas in which I might struggle, I think there are times where I might make my life harder than I need to because I'm overly masking, like a new job or something like that, or I'm around new people I don't really know and, just kind of feel uncomfortable in my own skin in those moments. And yet when I'm in other circumstances around people that I know and I love and who know me more authentically, things just kind of feel a little bit easier overall, right? Or I'm at least a little bit more forgiving of myself if I make a mistake. I think part of it is just you incorporating humor and being a little bit, in a healthy way, self-deprecating, right? Like I'll call myself out if I feel like I'm talking too much. Because it's a way of letting other people know, like, believe me, I'm here. I hear myself. I get it. I'm around me all the time. And I think part of it is just like, it kind of helps to ingratiate you with other people, especially if you do have some of these tendencies, right? It demonstrates that you are human and fallible and that you can and do make mistakes from time to time. But also, showing that awareness about yourself that I think people respect and appreciate, especially because of, how many people do you interact with or know that are just so lacking in awareness about themselves and how obtuse can they be about themselves and, basically lacking ownership and accountability to their behaviors and actions, right? So this is another Q&A. And like I said, if you have a response that you want to share it in the comments. If you have a question that you want to ask to me and to the general public watching this, feel free to throw that in the comments as well. Also, I have to mention too that the music used in a lot of my videos and my podcasts come from my friend Ben Backus. His account, his YouTube channel, and all of his links are in the description to this as well. But as always, thank you for your time and you considering me and hopefully subscribing and sharing and liking and all that great social media stuff too. But if nothing else, good luck to you and take care of yourself and be well.